This is the 007 Debriefings. I am Intelligence Officer Wiz.
And I'm Weapons Specialist Zero.
Zero, how you doing this week?
Doing alright. Things are getting a little bit interesting on my day job, so definitely glad for that, because several weeks of just sitting on my hands is the worst.
Well, Zero, we're here to comb the files of MI6, discuss the cinematic adventures of one James Bond. This week, Tomorrow Never Dies. Zero, there's a number of ways I could have went talking about Tomorrow Never Dies. This was actually the first Bond film I ever saw in the theaters, so that could have been one way. But I think the one way that we should go about this is with the person who played the Bond girl, Michelle Yeoh. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think before this, most of the Bond girls, their biggest roles were being a Bond girl. Whereas Michelle Yeoh is, I think, the exact opposite. So let's talk about your familiarity with Michelle Yeoh.
Most of my familiarity with her is through Hong Kong cinema. She usually plays a female character who is a fighter, somebody who's not going to go down for the count just because. She's definitely never a damsel in distress in Hong Kong cinema and stuff like that. I think one of the more memorable roles for me as a kid was, it's a Jet Li movie called The Tai Chi Master. She's one hell of a fighter, just kicking ass, and in that movie I think she's a dual-wielding broadsword user, so she's just hacking and slashing up dudes like a berserker. It's awesome. For me, I remember when she was revealed to be the Bond girl, I was like, okay, well that's interesting. I don't know if they're gonna go with the Hong Kong cinema angle and, just show that she can fight her way out of a situation, or if they're just going to kind of go, hey, well, we want you to be, the typical Bond damsel in distress archetype. I was just like, this could either go bad or good, and I'm a huge fan of Michelle Yeoh. And so that was why, when it was announced she was the Bond girl, I had a lot of trepidation. I won't lie, I was just like, ooh, I hope they do justice to how she has played her roles in the past, because, she's quite an action star, and to kind of throw her into a role where she does not get to break out her action movie chops would be fucking terrible.
I gotta be honest with you, I had to be reminded she was a Bond girl. I think we had this discussion about a year or so ago when we reviewed Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is the movie that gave her Oscar. I thought that her first movie in the States was Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, because it was the one that I remember her the most in. I thought she was amazing in that movie. But then after we started talking about it, we were like, oh, wait a minute, she was a Bond girl. Wait, when was she a Bond girl? What the hell? She went on to discuss, after she won the Oscar, that she had a very hard time finding roles after this movie. That this movie actually became kind of a hindrance for her after that, because she didn't do another movie in America until Crouching Tiger after this movie. Let's get into our mission objectives. We go through all sorts of different angles when we talk about every one of the Bond films. And we will start with 007, which is James Bond, played by Pierce Brosnan.
Pierce Brosnan.
Yep.
This one definitely plays more towards the Roger Moore style, so a lot of corny one-liners and clever quips here and there. So if you're into that sort of portrayal, then this is probably going to be something that you'll love Brosnan for. He does show kind of a bit of his, I guess you could say, trollish nature with Q. He really, really kind of gives it to Q when he gets the Bond car and everything. This one, there's unfortunately not that much spy action. The action sequences are in this one in the spades, and Brosnan feels like he's definitely got his bearings down for the action sequences. He's fine in this one, but I think for me, I think it's just more, I would have loved to see a little bit more spy and espionage sequences. Brosnan can do the spy and espionage stuff, but yeah, this one, there's a lot more action than the spy and espionage stuff.
Yeah, I don't think Brosnan's really making Bond into his own character in this, because a lot of the things the other actors have done with Bond is that they added something into the mix that made him unique, that others would pull out of but then spin into their own thing. I look at Brosnan as 60% Dalton, 35% Moore, and 5% Connery. 60 because I think he has that look that Dalton had, along with, I would say, a lot of that threatening nature to a certain extent, that they tried to at least. But then he does a lot of quippiness, he does a lot of comedic stuff with Moore. I don't think he's as effective as Moore in this. I honestly look at this when I watch him in the movie, I think I should probably tone it down a little bit for him. I think he has the charm of Moore, but I don't think he has the comedic timing of Moore, is how I would look at it. And then 5% is the Connery, which is basically the womanizing. the constantly sleeping with women, screwing them, and then in this movie, I think one of the weirder subplots is that he gets mixed up with a former person that he hooked up with. I thought would be interesting, but kind of went nowhere in this movie, honestly. And it was just like an element that I didn't really like. I think he's fine, but the more I'm watching of him, I think he's really the least interesting aspect of this movie. And I think that's how it's going to be going forward in other movies too, is that if he just tries to mix it up and I'm going to be like Moore in this one, I'm going to be like Dalton in this one, I'm like, that's not really that interesting, because then it just seems like he'll be a placeholder for whoever the next Bond is going to be.
In general, he's fine, but I definitely agree that he's unfortunately the most uninteresting character in this one, and in a sense, Michelle Yeoh almost steals the show, in my opinion. Oh god, I just love her. You've got a very, very clever, cunning, and very capable Bond girl in this one. Just when she makes her entrance at Carver's big headquarters out in Germany and everything, you see her and she looks like a pretty face. If you know Michelle Yeoh's roles, you're probably thinking to yourself, oh, she's more than a pretty face. And that definitely ends up showing up when Bond tries to go and heist the building for the GPS encoder. He ends up running into her there, and he's just like, the hell are you doing here? And then, of course, she's got her own spy gadgets. She's making her escape while he's basically taking all the attention from Carver's henchmen and everything. At that point, you're just like, oh, shit. We've got a Bond girl who's also kind of meddling in things too. When you get into some of the later sequences, like when they're out in the South China Sea trying to find out what happened to the Devonshire, and then they end up getting caught, and after the escape sequence in Vietnam and everything, she ends up holding on to her own by fighting off a whole bunch of Carver's henchmen, just trying to take care of business, though the movie hints that it's probably more General Chang's men trying to get rid of her because she's a bit of an inconvenience. You see her just doing what Michelle Yeoh does best, just martial arts, action sequences, and the choreography is fantastic. When you throw her into an action role, she does what she does best, and she just kicks ass and everything. But as said, I personally just love her as an actress, and the fact that just she's a very capable one is just nothing but fantastic to see. So it definitely, for me, this is probably just going to be just a point where she's going to be one of my favorite Bond girls in the entire lineage.
My basic two thoughts I had after watching this film was, I thought she was criminally underutilized in this film, and I don't remember her being this breathtakingly stunning. I'll be honest, man. Let's get to her looks first, and I'll get into why I think she's criminally underutilized. When I saw her in that one get-up where she was in the red jacket and the white t-shirt, I was like, oh my god, she is fucking gorgeous. Honestly, I watched this movie, I was like, I thought Jane Seymour was the best looking, and I saw her, I was like, I don't remember her being this beautiful. Holy crap. Like, she was always a good looking woman, but after watching this, I was like, I was not expecting that. I think she is very underutilized. She only gets into the action towards the second half of the film. You mentioned the whole sequence where she's getting away while Bond is unwillingly distracting the bad guys for her and everything, which I thought was comedically fine, but she has very good comedic timing usually, and the film doesn't utilize that. And on top of that, you mentioned the action sequences. The only one I really remember with her, the martial arts, is towards the end of that one sequence after the chase down with the helicopter. Other than that, I'm like, that's it? That's all you're going to show with her in this? I like Michelle Yeoh. I agree with you. I think she's a great actress. I don't see how you could see that in this movie. I would see flashes of it, but if I was somebody who didn't know who she was, I'd be like, oh, well, that's interesting. A Bond girl who knows some martial arts. That's neat. And that's all you would get out of this, from me at least.
You will not find me disagreeing that she is criminally underutilized. Okay. And as said, she's a very, very capable Bond girl to boot. So yes, it is absolutely depressing that she's just underutilized, because at the Carver facility scene, yeah, there absolutely could have been an action scene with her just doing what she has to do to get out of the situation. Yeah, we're just gonna have her comedically going, and hey, thanks for taking the guys with you. I'm getting the fuck out of here. She does have comedy chops in Hong Kong cinema too, but you're just underutilizing her. She's a fantastic action star. Why?
Yeah. And one other issue I had, the sexual fling at the end with Bond, I thought was incredibly forced. Would you believe that her character would do anything with Bond other than, yeah, I'm done with my mission, goodbye.
No, hell no.
Yeah.
I was just like, this is so fucking corny, and this just seems like it is just shoehorned in to say, well, Brosnan Bond's a womanizer, so, I guess have her, just making out with him. They don't have to hump, but, just have her make out with him. It's fine, it's fine. It's just like, no, it's not.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty forced. Thank God she doesn't, fall madly in love with him in this movie, but I was like, that's a little weird. I think she does well in the role, but she's absolutely underutilized. And I think that's kind of why she had an issue finding work at the end, because she would go on this article on Express and basically say that after that, she only got roles that really did not utilize her gifts. And I could see somebody watching this movie and not knowing who she is and going, I guess that's what she's good at, I guess. I don't know. Could you tell from this movie that she is as talented as you would know from, Yes, Madam, or any of the other movies that she was done in Hong Kong?
God, no. If this was my first exposure to her, God, no. But as said, since I've been exposed to her since very young, I knew a lot about her action chops and a little bit of her comedy chops as well, too. That was one thing that I still remember. Even when I first saw the movie, I was like, wow, you have one of the most beloved female action stars from the Hong Kong cinema space, and you criminally underutilize her. This is absolutely depressing.
She should have been probably the best out of any of the Bond girls, and she's honestly the most disappointing. All right, let's get into villains, which is Elliot Carver, played by Jonathan Pryce.
He seems like the delegating type. You see him there when he kind of brags and gloats just about how perfect his plans are, and then he ends up relegating whatever task that he needs done to his henchman Stamper, and that's pretty much the most that you get out of Carver. Is he kind of clever and egomaniacal? Yeah, sure. I mean, he's trying to basically, start his media empire by basically manipulating the world's military into blowing each other up, so his news network can basically run news 24/7 and he'll be the first one there with the scoop and everything. Yeah, kind of neat that, he's got this sort of plan and he's doing it by basically just stealing the other nation's weapons and kind of using them to further advance his schemes. I kind of saw him as, you're kind of a megalomaniacal planner and manipulator. Okay.
Yeah, I think what's strange about this villain is that if you were to get someone to explain this villain to someone who hasn't seen the movie, and you talk about he is a multimedia mogul who wants to create news that will start World War III between China and Britain, which will give him exclusive coverage to all the carnage that goes on, you would think on the face of it, would be like, wow, that's actually kind of a deeper plot than I would have imagined for a Bond film. They're talking about how mass media affects people, affects countries and politics. Wow, that actually seems kind of interesting. But then you watch the film and it's like, oh, this is one of the campiest Bond villains that I have ever seen in this movie. This guy seems like a more Bond villain. Wouldn't he be perfect in a film with Roger Moore?
Now that I sit and think about it a little more, yeah, actually, he would be appropriate in kind of a Moore period Bond movie.
Jonathan Pryce just plays him. He just chews the fucking scenery in this movie. There is a point where he is just deliciously giddy about the fact that he's about to extort a senator for sleeping with a cheerleader, and then says, and then slime him anyway. You gotta be kidding me. I'm not entirely against it, because Price is having the time of his life with this role. He's just like, oh, fuck it. I'll do whatever the fuck I want. So at that end, I'm like, all right, I can kind of enjoy it. And this should have been a villain that should have been a lot more thoughtful, but I think because Price just says, fuck it, I'm just gonna go nuts and taunt Michelle Yeoh with karate chops and stuff in one scene, I'm like, you know what? I think that's what I'll do, and I'm kind of glad they kind of went with it, because I don't think you're gonna get that deep of a movie in this. I guess, like the Bond girl, It's kind of disappointing, but it's good for what it is. All right, so let's get to spy action.
Not much on the spy part, but holy crap, do they give you shovelful after shovelful of the action. It takes about 5 minutes before just shit starts blowing up. This is one of the ones that a lot of people sort of remembered, especially when they think of Brosnan, because they're just like, oh man, the action was so good. And it's just like, yeah, I don't have anything against the action, but it leaves me a little bit wanting because Bond is a spy. I mean, he's got to have some spy and espionage stuff. Yeah, there's the scene where he goes and steals the GPS encryptor back, but after a couple minutes of that, it's just, oh shit, I've been caught because Wei Lin tripped the alarm and I'm having to get my ass the fuck out, and then car chase back to his hotel, and then running into Dr. Kaufman and killing him, and then of course, boom, right to another action scene with the remote-controlled BMW 750IL, and that he's just kind of racing around the parking garage and everything. If you like more action-y Bonds, this one probably will not disappoint you because it's just action sequence after action sequence after action sequence.
I think this is overall a step down in the action department, but I will say that you're right on the action sequences. I think they're very good. And I think the stunt work is actually really good in this movie, too. And it's about to an equal to where GoldenEye was. There's a nice amount of explosions, great action sequences when involving cars, and some of the gunfights are not bad either. I just think some of these scenes in this movie are fucking ridiculous in this movie. Like, you mean to tell me a helicopter pilot has not only the skill to be able to fly into a crowded street, but also angularly move that thing while being steady as hell to not crash itself while chasing Bond on the bike? Like, you really want me to believe that, right? How utterly ridiculous was that? It looked kind of cool, but like, I'm watching going, you really want me to believe that? Because one of my favorite action movies is Mission Impossible. And even I thought the end sequence with the train and the helicopter was a little far-fetched. They do that to like an nth degree in this movie. And I'm like, why? That's utterly ridiculous. Like,
the helicopter doing its like meat grinder thing, I was just like, ugh, I get it. You're trying to set up a sequence of tension where, you know, Bond's got to decide, hey, how do I want to play this? And yeah, it's dramatic looking stunt-wise, but there's so much suspension of belief that can happen.
Yeah. And then at the end of that whole sequence, they so happen to find a shower that they shower together in, which, you know, honestly, actually, to see Michelle Yeoh in a wet t-shirt, I think I'm okay with it. Anyway. And let's get to the car chase sequence involving the Nokia phone that has a screen on it. Like, that was...
Oh, yeah, it's a little, like, old-school Sony Ericsson phone.
Yeah. I'm like, that's pretty corny, but I'm okay with that a little bit. Before he turns on the car with the phone, okay? You notice how everybody was banging the shield and the glass and everything with hammers and trying to puncture it, and it was perfectly fine. How is it that all of that did not break the glass, but one bullet did during the chase sequence?
Yeah. The inconsistency is a little wild.
Yes. Yeah. Like, I get it. It's like, well, you wouldn't have that cool sequence where the rocket goes through the car. And yeah, I get it. But I'm like, come on. Really? Like, ugh. But while we're getting to that as well, I think the tech in this movie is the epitome of I win buttons. I think it's just incredibly absurd that he has a phone that also has a taser, that also has a... What was it? He also has a fingerprint scanner. The tech I like is where there's a grain of truth to it, where it's like, oh, this kind of makes sense. But because they have more tech, they can do this. And this was all, like, utterly fucking ridiculous to me.
On the tech side, yeah, there's a lot of, like, Deus Ex Machina sort of, like, escape buttons in the garage chase sequence. You've got Carter's men setting up the tow truck and pulling, like, a stainless steel braided cable to try to basically decapitate Bond and just shred the top half of the car, and just... Bond presses a button on the remote control from his phone, and then the BMW logo opens up to reveal like a tiny little buzzsaw, and I'm just like, okay, now we're just getting silly. Just, I don't think a fucking tiny-ass buzzsaw like that is gonna magically just cut through a fucking steel braided wire. You know what? Fucking forget it. Ugh.
Yeah. But then you have all these crazy things in this movie, and yet, like we mentioned in the Bond girl section, you absolutely underutilized Michelle Yeoh. She only has, like, one scene to do any martial arts. Really? And then on top of that, like, the stunts that she did do, they were good, but I would imagine you've seen a lot better in her work, correct?
Oh yeah, some of the stuff in the Hong Kong cinema space, especially if it's like period embellished historical sort of legend retellings and stuff like that, like the Tai Chi Master, A Crouching Tiger. I mean, some of the stuff does involve like silly wire fu stuff, but even still, there have been action movies that she's played where she's done some pretty serious stunt work in those movies as well too. It's a crying shame that she is underutilized. For God's sake, she was in Police Story 3. She was in Super Cop. Come on.
Yeah. Like, even Rush Hour, even though that's a clear Hollywood movie, utilized Jackie Chan's stunt work in a good way. And you have a movie that's more expensive, that has much more of a bigger audience, and you don't use her in the best way possible when it comes to the action in this movie. It's fun. It is entertaining, but it's still disappointing. All right, let's get into the theme song and opening credits. And the theme song is Tomorrow Never Dies, written by Sheryl Crow, and Mitchell Fromm, performed by Sheryl Crow.
I love Sheryl Crow, personally. So for me, I was just like, oh man, this is kind of like ballady and bluesy. And then when I saw like her name come in the credits, I was like, no freaking wonder, it's freaking Sheryl Crow. I love her.
Yeah.
The song thematically is okay. I mean, it kind of talks about Bond as, just kind of the guy he is, but also embellishes the whole like womanizing bit about him. And then you've got kind of like the neat sequences where you're just being shown things that are x-rayed, being manipulated and things like that. And then you've got the CGI cyberspace girls that when a screen hovers over them, you kind of see like the dancing model that are being represented by these CGI dancing girls and stuff like that. I mean, overall, it's all right. Love Sheryl Crow's performance of the song, but that's just kind of how I feel. It was all right.
Yeah. The song is fine. I think I'm at a point now where I think I'm going to stop complaining if the theme song doesn't fit thematically with the movie, because it just seems like most of them don't. I'll give them bonus points when they do fit, but yeah, this is a fine song. I like the song. I like Sheryl Crow as well. I think the opening credits, big improvement from the last movie. I like the future tech kind of, specifically the 90s future tech feel that this thing has, because if you were to do this today, it'd be like, that's kind of weird. But it kind of fits fairly well in this movie, so I thought it was kind of nice. All right, conclusion time.
This one, I will have to say mission failure, because just Bond is just not interesting. Then there's the whole underutilization of Michelle Yeoh, even though she's fantastic in the little bits that you get to see of her, that just doesn't put enough lift to pull this up into to mission accomplished. Carver's an okay villain. He's really just kind of playing it up and just really having fun with the role, but you don't see him very often. He just kind of delegates the stuff to his henchmen. It's like, hey, yeah, Stamper, go kill Bond for me, thanks. And then, just kind of runs off to escape or do whatever. This was kind of the period that I kind of started to get frustrated with the Bond movies, especially when a lot of the gadgets are just Deus Ex Machina elements. Just, Bond's in a jam? Oh, well, he'll just deploy this gadget, and boom, he's out of a jam. I would like a little bit more tension, a little more drama, that Bond's really gotta really, really use his noodle and just think of a real clever way, even if it's brutal and inelegant, to just get out of a jam. And when it's just like, steel cable trying to cut my car off the top and possibly decapitate me? Oh, well, I'll just pull up this handy buzzsaw that's just hidden in the front of my car, just buried under the BMW emblem. Easy peasy. It's just like, damn it, guys.
I am surprised that you said mission failure, because I'm actually going to agree with you. I think it's a mission failure as well. I can't say this film's bad. I think it is turn your brain off and enjoy good. I think it's one of those movies where if you are watching it and you just kind of give into it, I think you can find it enjoyable. But a lot of the problems I have is just the disappointment I have with this film. You have two really good actors, Jonathan Pryce and Michelle Yeoh, and you underutilize both. One is just a complete camp machine, and the other is just underutilized to a point where I kind of question why she was selected in this movie. That's bad. Like, I like Michelle Yeoh, like you like Michelle Yeoh too. Maybe not as much, but anyway, I watched this film and go, does she really need to be in here? Because I don't think they really put much thought into her. And then you mentioned a lot of the problems with the action, how it just seems kind of ridiculous at certain points. I agree with you there as well. I think the best way I can put this movie is this. It's not a regrettable movie, but it's a forgettable movie. overall, I'm going to say mission failure. Mission failure for you?
Mission failure.
Mission failure for Tomorrow Never Dies. Now, if you want my full review on this movie, you can go to my website at IamTheWiz.com. You'll have my full written review right on the site, along with a link to the video that has this review that you've just listened to. Thank you for listening to this review. If you want to know what we're reviewing in the next couple days, you can look on the screen right now to see what's coming up next. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and leave a like on this video. If you want to discuss your opinion on the film or the review itself, please leave a comment. And if you want to hear more, subscribe to the channel. Thank you again for listening. I will talk to you next time.